You probably think I'm going to tell you what today's video is about. Well, I'm not going to. You're just going to have to remain in suspense. While it's most closely associated with the thriller type genre, suspense plays a role in almost any good story. So if you thought you could just ignore this video because you don't write in that genre, then you're wrong. The intensity of that suspense and whether or not it's a selling point of your story is what varies by genre. But at the most basic level, all stories have some level of suspense tied to how the main conflict is going to be resolved. The fact that readers don't know how the characters are going to overcome the main conflict is in itself a form of suspense. That said, there are times when suspense is meant to be a central focus of your story. In those cases, you need to do some very specific things in order to create the proper level of suspense. So let's talk about suspense and how you can write it more effectively. Let's start with a definition. Suspense is the temporary cessation or suspension of something. That was a really bad definition for this video, so maybe I should just make something up. I think we all have a general idea of what suspense is. It's that feeling of anxiety, foreboding, or dread about something bad that we know might happen, or something bad that we know is definitely going to happen. There's a couple of things you might notice about that definition. First, there's a couple ors in it, and second, it's written in the future tense. Let's start with the last part. Suspense is always about something that is going to happen, not something that has happened. If the main creator of suspense in your story is, say, the salad bar is going to run out of croutons in the next 10 minutes, then the minute the salad bar runs out of croutons, all of the suspense is gone because the bad thing happened. Suspense is about the time leading up to something happening, not dealing with the consequences after something happens. This is what separates a suspense story from a mystery. A mystery is about something that's already happened. Suspense is about something that's going to happen. Horror stories, on the other hand, are created while bad things are happening. So you might say that suspense occurs in the lead up to a bad thing, horror occurs while that bad thing is happening, and a mystery can occur after a bad thing has happened. Just remember that suspense is about the future. And the emotions around that suspense are going to change based on what we know about the bad thing that is going to happen. Knowing specifically that the salad bar is going to run out of croutons creates a very different feeling than just knowing that there's some salad bar related crisis on the horizon. Will it be the romaine lettuce? Is someone going to sneeze on the forks? We don't necessarily need to know exactly what is going to happen in order for suspense to be created. We just need to know that that thing that is going to happen is a bad thing. Which ties nicely into the last element. Suspense can only be created if the thing we know is going to happen is bad. The stakes need to be set very high in order for there to be any suspense for the reader. This is why I used a crouton-related example earlier. So those are the three elements that make up suspense. Something happening in the future that we may or may not know much about. The thing that's happening is a bad thing, and the stakes of that thing happening are very high. Now that we've got the definition out of the way, let's talk about how you actually build suspense into your story. First, you need to tell your reader about the bad thing that is going to happen. How you go about this will depend on your viewpoint and how much you want the reader to know about what is coming. Also remember that the reader needs to know that something bad is coming, but the characters, especially the hero, don't necessarily need to know. A lot of classical tragedies use this formula where the hero doesn't know that something bad is coming, but the audience does, and this is where the suspense is built from. There's a number of different ways that you can get this information across to the reader. Obviously, if you're writing in third-person omniscient, the reader is going to know what everybody is thinking and doing all the time, which will likely clue them in on bad things that are coming. If you're writing in a limited perspective, having viewpoints from the villain can be handy. We don't necessarily need to know exactly what the bad guy is planning, but it's easy to give hints that it's not good. If your villain is buying weapons-grade plutonium or plotting to disrupt a shipment of croutons, then we know what they're planning is not good. You can also give the reader a glimpse into the future. The King Killer Chronicle, which is surprisingly hard to say, does this when we see present-day Kavoth as the innkeeper, which sets up the entire story as him explaining how he ended up there and the tragic circumstances surrounding it. We don't know yet exactly what led him to that position in life, but we can infer that those things aren't good. Yes, I know, we all want the third book to come out. Next, make sure you consider time, specifically the time between the reader finding out that a bad thing is going to happen and the time when that bad thing actually happens. Putting some time pressure on the character to solve the problem is going to drive up the suspense. You want to be careful to make sure there's not too much time, but you also don't want to make there be too little. Having slow periods in your story where the action slows down a bit can actually build up some more suspense. This may be a little bit counterintuitive. It makes sense that you would want to have a lot of action and things happening to help build the suspense. But in fact, the opposite is true. Having slower scenes with less action leading up to the big thing happening will build more apprehension in the reader for when the thing actually happens, which ties nicely into the last point. When that big thing you've promised eventually happens, and please make sure that it actually does happen, your reader needs to care. Having your reader care about what happens basically boils down to 2 points. First, they need to care about the characters in your story who are going to be impacted by this thing. If a bad thing is going to happen to characters that the reader doesn't care about, then they aren't going to care. Creating likable and relatable characters is its own ball of wax, so I conveniently have a pre-made video that you can go watch to find out how to do that. There should be a thing somewhere up here. You also want to make sure the stakes are high enough to create suspense, which is again why I used a crouton related example before. The conflict needs to really affect the characters, and the consequences for not preventing it need to be severe. You want to make sure that the characters have a personal connection and will be negatively affected when these events unfold. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to see more stuff like this, you can check out all my other writing advice videos and subscribe to my channel. I post new writing advice videos every Wednesday. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.